My name is Maya Vance, and I turned 34 at my mother's dining room table. The candles weren't even lit yet when my mom leaned over to my dad and whispered just loud enough for me to catch it over the clatter of silver. "Since everyone's here, have your son go change the locks at her apartment." Her apartment, mine. The one I bought with my own hard-earned money. The one where my 7-year-old son sleeps every night. My dad gave a tight nod without looking up from his plate. My brother Justin set down his fork, muttered something about checking a work call, and stepped out into the hallway with his key ring jangling in his hand. My family kept passing the roasted potatoes. I smiled past the gravy and complimented the glazed ham. 1 hour later, Justin walked back through that front door with a face the color of hospital bed sheets. He leaned down to Mom's ear, his voice trembling, and whispered, "Mom, He never finished the sentence. Here is what nobody at that table knew. I already understood exactly what was waiting for him in my parking lot, because I had spent 6 weeks quietly building it. Ever since a declined debit card at a pharmacy counter started me pulling at a loose thread that ended inside a yellowed manila folder in my mother's china cabinet, revealing what my parents had been doing to me for 12 years. Welcome back to Their Secret Stories, where women who stayed quiet for years finally tell you exactly how they walked away. If stories about family betrayal, hidden records, and hard-won boundaries speak to you, drop a comment below with the city you're listening from, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, let me take you back 6 weeks. 6 weeks before that dinner, my life was small, quiet, and mine. I worked night shifts in the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Memorial in Pittsford, which means I know how to stay completely level while alarm monitors are screaming. 12-hour shifts, then home to my condo at Crestview Manor over in Fairport, 15 minutes from the house I grew up in. I bought that condo in 2021, and I can still tell you the exact cool weight of the key the first time I turned it in the deadbolt. 29 years old, and it was the first door that had ever been only mine. My son Toby was 7 that summer, all elbows, scraped knees, and endless questions. Learning to ride his bicycle in the parking lot while my neighbor Hank cheered from his porch. Hank Mercer is 69, a retired state trooper with 30 years on the force, a slow porch swing, and an old hound named Roscoe who supervises the whole complex. On Tuesdays, I drove across town to my parents' house for dinner because Tuesday dinner was etched onto my mother's wall calendar in heavy ink. And things on my mother's calendar happened, whether you wanted them to or not. That week, she called me twice about my upcoming 34th birthday. "We're holding it here, honey. Family only." Her voice had a thick sweetness to it that I hadn't heard since I was a little girl. I remember standing at my kitchen counter with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the faucet. My mother has dictated every holiday my family has ever celebrated, but she had not thrown me a birthday dinner since I turned 12. I told myself people soften as they age. I told myself 61 does that to a woman. Then I finished wiping down the counter, checked on Toby, and folded the thought away the way you fold a sweater you know you'll never wear. 2 days later, a pharmacy card reader would unfold it for me. You should understand what my role was in the Vance household, because it was never just daughter. I was the fixer. At 16, I was the one translating the gas utility bill at the kitchen table because Dad's eyes got tired. At 19, I filed my parents' tax returns for the first time, and I handled them every spring after that. I sorted Dad's blood pressure medication into a plastic day of the week box. When the water heater died, when the car insurance lapsed, when Justin's landlord threatened to evict him, the phone rang in my pocket. My mother had a phrase for it, spoken like a solemn decree. That's what family does. Looking back, I can count maybe 3 times in my life that sentence arrived without a favor attached to it. Here is the embarrassing part, the truth I hate admitting out loud. I managed everyone's life paperwork except my own. When I turned 18, Dad set up a gray metal document box in his den and told me he'd keep my important papers safe. Birth certificate, social security card, the old savings bond from Grandma Eleanor. It felt like protection. I was a working-class scholarship kid pulling double prep, cook shifts through nursing school. I liked believing someone was guarding the deep foundation so I could focus on surviving the shifts. I paid my rent and later my mortgage through my local credit union, always on time, never missing a date. And I never once pulled my own credit report. I know how foolish that sounds coming from an ICU nurse who reads complex lab values for a living. But you don't audit the people who taught you how to tie your shoes. You just keep showing up on Tuesdays, passing the potatoes, and filing their taxes. It took me 12 years to discover what was inside that gray metal box besides my birth certificate. It took one declined debit card to start the lesson. It happened at the Walgreens on Elmwood Avenue on a humid Thursday afternoon. Toby had a fever and a middle ear infection. I was holding his liquid antibiotics in one hand and my debit card in the other when the card reader flashed declined in dull gray letters. I ran it again. Declined. I tried the backup card I keep tucked away for emergencies. Sius Pitai DFR Aud Kello ISUR. There was a line building behind me, a teenager holding energy drinks, an older gentleman with a cane, all of them politely staring at the gum display, while my neck went hot. I paid with 2 crumpled $20 bills from the bottom of my purse, carried Toby to the car, and sat in the driver's seat doing what I do at work when a patient's vitals crash. Slow breath. Look at the numbers. That night, after Toby was fast asleep, I logged onto a credit monitoring service. I sat in the dark of my kitchen reading my own name like it belonged to a ghost. There was a high-limit Visa card opened in 2022. I have never applied for a major credit card in my life. Balance tithe 200. Status 60 days past due. That single delinquent account had dragged my credit score off a cliff, which is why an ICU nurse with a flawless bill paying record was humiliated over a $20 prescription. My hands didn't shake. 12 years of trauma care trains that out of you. I clicked into the account details looking for the address attached to the fraud, expecting some drop house out of state. The billing address was a 2-story home on Highland Avenue in Rochester, a house I knew better than my own. I grew up in it. I did what you are supposed to do, in the exact order you are supposed to do it. Friday morning, I called the fraud department of the bank that issued the card. I sat through 20 minutes of hold music and officially reported the account as unauthorized. I placed an immediate 90-day fraud alert across my file. I requested paper copies of the original application and statements. The representative was patient and methodical. Near the end of the call, she read out the contact telephone number listed on the application just to verify. It wasn't my mobile number. It was a landline. I could recite it in my sleep because it had been my parents' kitchen phone number since 1998. I thanked her in my calm nurse voice, hung up, and stared at my reflection in the black glass of the microwave door. And a memory surfaced, one I hadn't touched in nearly 7 years. When I was 27, a few months after Toby was born, I received an official letter about a credit inquiry I didn't recognize. I had asked about it. I drove to my parents' house with the notice in my diaper bag and laid it on the kitchen table. Dad chuckled, pulled a folded piece of paper from the gray box in his den, and showed it to me. Bank letterhead, a brief apology, something about a technical clerical error that had already been resolved. Mom had patted my knee. Bank mistake, sweetheart. Your father already straightened it out. You have a newborn. Go home and rest. The temporary alert I'd set back then expired on its own 3 months later. I remembered thinking at the time that the letterhead had looked slightly off, the paper too bright, the bank logo a shade too dark. But the baby cried, and I let it go. Sitting in my kitchen 7 years later, I finally let myself finish the thought I had stopped thinking at 27. Saturday morning, Hank was out front fixing a rusted hinge on the wooden deck railing that the HOA board had been ignoring for months. I held the wooden posts steady while he drove the heavy screws, Roscoe lying in the shade supervising us both. Hank mentioned an old case from his state trooper days, a forgery ring back in 1988 where a man's own brother had signed his signature cleaner than he could sign it himself. 30 years on patrol taught me one thing, kid, Hank said, tightening the final screw. Paper never lies. People do. I came within half a second of telling him everything right there at the railing. I had the words formed in my throat. But when you've been the pillar of a family for as long as I have, asking for help feels like stripping off your clothes in the middle of a crowded room. Ever since my divorce, my world had narrowed down to Toby, the ICU, and my quiet condo. I was used to carrying weight alone, so I made a comment about the HOA instead. My phone rang while Hank was putting his tools back in his toolbox. My mother's voice came through the line, sharp and bright. Maya, you're still keeping Wednesday open for your birthday dinner, right? We moved it to Wednesday. Did I tell you? She had not told me. She talked for 4 straight minutes about a red velvet cake from Bella's Bakery, about Aunt Clara coming down from Utica, about getting the family together. I stood in the drive, watching Roscoe sleep, feeling the small hairs on my arms stand up. My mother had not baked, bought, or acknowledged a birthday cake for me in 22 years. Now she was calling twice a week to talk about one. Hank watched me hang up the phone. Everything okay, he asked. I'm not sure yet. I told him. It was the most honest thing I'd said all month. Sunday night, I worked a 12-hour shift. ICU nights can have quiet windows if you're lucky. The kind where the cardiac monitors hum steady and the break room coffee turns thick. I used my break to request my full credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. The break room laser printer spat out nearly 40 pages. And I sat there at 2 in the morning reading them the way I read a chart on an unstable patient. Fast first to gauge the bleed, then slow to count the damage. It was far worse than one Visa card. There was an account opened in 2014, another in 2016, a store card in 2017, a personal signature loan in 2019 for $13,500 paid down and closed, cards in 2020 and 2022. Some accounts were dead and settled, others were active and maxed out. 9 accounts total, 12 years of financial history. None of it opened by me, all of it carrying my name like a stolen coat. I pulled out my color-coded pens and mapped the dates into a line. The very first card was opened in June 2014. I graduated from nursing school in June 2014. It was the exact month I hauled my cardboard boxes out of my parents' house to move into my first apartment at 21. I had been so proud of that brass key. Someone had waited for me to walk out the front door, and then that same week opened a side door behind me using my social security number. I sat in that break room with my cold coffee, 40 pages spread across the table. Brenda, a veteran cardiac nurse, stuck her head in to check on me. I told her I was reading up on some old records, which was true. I was reading 12 years of my life written by someone else's hand. Over the next 3 days, I converted my kitchen table into a command station. Every account received its own row. Date opened, outstanding balance, status. The numbers came out cold and exact. The 20 funds, 800 in active open balances currently rotting under my name, and one specific detail repeated down the printout like a steady pulse. Every single statement was set to ship to the exact same mailing address, the house on Highland Avenue. For 12 years, every bill, every late notice, Every account update envelope had been delivered directly to my childhood bedroom, where I would never see it and where someone else could manage it. That was the moment the situation stopped being a mystery and became a deliberate method. The inquiry notice back when I was 27 hadn't been a system error. It had been an interception failure. The one time a notice leaked out to my real address, quickly extinguished with a fake letter on paper just a shade too blue. I drew a line on a legal pad and wrote down the only two people who fit every variable, who had possessed my social security number since the day I was born, who stored my original birth certificate in a gray box, who controlled the mailbox on Highland Avenue, who answered that 1998 landline. I wrote the names down, then drew a hard black line through them. Then I wrote them again. My hand wasn't steady that time, my parents'. I sat there for a long time listening to the refrigerator hum. Then I squared the pages, clipped them into a clean folder, and locked them away. Because at the hospital, when the lab results tell you something terrible, you don't scream at the paper. You run more tests. Brenda caught me near the elevators the next morning and read the exhaustion on my face. I gave her the short, sanitized version in the stairwell. Her reaction was immediate and emotional. Call your mother, Maya. Ask her directly. There has to be a reasonable explanation. I loved her for her decency. But I heard myself answer in my chief charge, nurse voicey. You don't wake up a crashing patient to ask if they're hemorrhaging. You check the chart. If I call her now, I'll get tears, a rehearsed story, and a bonfire in their backyard by sunset. So I chose the procedural path. I filed no public claims yet, said nothing at Tuesday dinner, changed nothing in the tone of my voice. Instead, I placed a total security freeze on my credit with all three bureaus. Not a temporary alert this time, a hard lock that prevents any new credit line from opening without a personal PIN that only I possess. It felt like locking a steel vault door from the inside. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. The sweetness in her voice had frayed around the edges. Maya, what did you do with the bank? Someone called your father about an account verification, and the system flagged it. She laughed lightly, trying to frame it as an annoyance. These financial bureaucrats are ridiculous. I looked out my window at the sunny lot and asked evenly, which bank? Mom, she brushed past the question like sweeping dust under a rug. And there it was, the first major slip. My credit freeze was completely private and visible, and brand new. Yet within 48 hours it had blocked my mother. I told her, banks make administrative errors all the time, and hung up gently. If you have ever sat across a dinner table from someone you love, holding a question that could burn the entire house down, you know that heavy silence. Tell me in the comments how long you carried yours before you finally spoke up. And if you're finding this story compelling, take a second to hit subscribe, because what I found next at the county recorder's office changed everything. After that phone call, I stopped being a confused daughter and became what my job trained me to be, an investigator who builds an airtight file. I bought a thick black binder and a box of colored divider tabs, green tabs for open balances, yellow for timeline dates, red for any entry involving direct cash transfers. On the inside of my walk-in closet door, where Toby couldn't see it, I taped up a visual timeline, 2014 at the top, the present at the bottom, index cards for every single transaction I could verify with official documentation. My rule was strict. If I couldn't produce a stamped paper showing it happened, it did not go on the wall. Emotional assumptions don't survive a formal review. Documents do. It was the 2019 personal signature loan that made me freeze that week. A $13,500 opened and disbursed in March 2019, paid down faithfully and closed out. A clean loan used to establish credit depth. I stood in my closet staring at the card, trying to recall March 2019. Then I didn't have to try anymore. Toby was born on March 15, 2019. I spent that entire month in a high-risk room at St. Jude's with a continuous blood pressure monitor strapped to my arm and severe preeclampsia written across my chart, under strict orders not to sit up unassisted. While I was hooked to an IV line fighting to safely deliver my son, someone was standing somewhere signing my name to pull $13,500 in liquid cash. I pinned the index card to the closet door and wrote one question under it in heavy red marker. What else was signed in March 2019? I didn't know yet that the county government keeps an exact record answering that question in a basement filing cabinet, and that it costs $2 to print a copy. Tuesday dinner that week was a study in human behavior, and I observed it like a visiting researcher. My mother commanded the room. Glazed pork loin for Dad. Extra roasted potatoes for Justin, who arrived 20 minutes late in his work boots and had a warm plate waiting for him without asking. Mom asked about my ICU shifts in that way she has of asking without listening. Reminded everyone that Bella's Bakery needed the final headcount for my red velvet birthday cake, and made a comment about my condo being so far out of the way, which is a bizarre way to describe a 15-minute drive. Dad peeled the damp label off his domestic beer bottle and offered brief thoughts on the weather. I watched them pass the serving bowls and thought in 21,800. And you're worried about cake head count. Toward the end of the meal, I set my water glass down and mentioned casually that some of my mail seemed to be routing to their address by mistake. Just old college records system glitches, and asked if they would hand any incoming letters to me unopened going forward. The table went completely still for a second. Mom smiled with her mouth, her eyes remaining cold. Family doesn't need permission to handle household mail. Maya, she said, spearing a piece of pork, not an explanation, not a denial. A statement of ownership. I smiled back and said, of course, silly me. On my way to the kitchen with the empty plates, I walked past the mahogany china hutch, the ornate glass display cabinet housing dishes no one ever used. Tucked under a stack of cloth napkins, I saw it. A yellowed manila folder lying flat, its tab worn soft from frequent handling. I reached my hand out toward the hutch door, but my mother materialized beside me and shut the glass cabinet smooth as a curtain. Those napkins are reserved for Easter, she said smoothly. It was mid-July. The birthday party preparations grew stranger from there. Mom called Thursday morning to confirm Wednesday night. Family only, honey, just us, Aunt Clara, and the cousins. Then, mid-conversation, she took a sharp conversational turn I have replayed 1,000 times. You still keep your important documents in that little gray fireproof box, don't you? The lockbox on your closet shelf. I gave a vague answer. She pressed on light as air. Well, you definitely should keep it locked. With you working those long night shifts and the place sitting empty, does anyone actually check on your apartment while you're at the hospital? I told her Hank kept a close eye on the lot, which she dismissed with a brief laugh. That old retired trooper. Then she offered, generous as a queen, why don't we keep Toby overnight on Wednesday after your birthday dinner? So you can relax. He can sleep in Justin's old room. Every protective instinct I possess went dead silent and cold. I thanked her and said Toby already had a sleepover arranged with Brenda's boys, which wasn't true yet but became true 5 minutes later after one quick phone call. When I hung up, I wrote 3 new index cards for the closet wall. Mom asked about the lockbox. Mom asked who watches the condo at night. Mom wants Toby out of my apartment on Wednesday night. I stood back and stared at the wall. The pieces were shifting toward each other. But I couldn't see the final structure yet. What I knew for certain was simple. My mother had never once inquired about my personal paperwork in my adult life. Now, it was the very second topic she raised right after the birthday cake. Monday morning, instead of sleeping after my night shift, I drove straight to the Monroe County Clerk's office with a travel mug of coffee. If someone had been executing financial documents in my name for 12 years, somewhere in those public archives was a document bearing a state notary stamp. I handed the clerk my identification and $2. She printed out the answer to the red marker question on my closet door. It was a general durable financial power of attorney. Grantor Maya Vance, attorneys, in fact, Victor Vance and Helen Vance, jointly and severally, granting total authority over bank accounts, real estate, personal property, and credit lines, signed and notarized on March 14, 2019, at a small notary office on the west side of Rochester, a 40-minute drive from my bed at St. Jude's Memorial. I stood at the counter reading my own name. It was an exceptional forgery, confident, flowing, looping the exact way I loop my letters. Dated on a day when I couldn't walk 3 steps to the bathroom without a labor nurse holding my arm. I was admitted on March 12th with dangerous blood pressure. Toby was delivered on March 15th. I was discharged on the 19th. According to county records, on March 14th, I had apparently strolled into a notary office across town to cheerfully hand over my entire financial existence to my parents. The legal document had 2 witness signature lines. The first witness was the notary's clerk. The second witness line was present, but on the county scan, the ink had smeared into a dark blur, a ghost signature I couldn't decipher no matter how I angled the paper. I paid for 3 certified, stamped copies. On the day someone swore under oath that I stood before a public notary, I couldn't even stand up. That certified fact went to the top of my closet wall in heavy red ink, underlined twice. A power of attorney is a master key. Once I knew it existed, 12 years of random events organized themselves around it. The 2019 loan, the address changes, the maxed out store cards, all of it flowed downstream from that single forged piece of paper. Financial institutions don't probe deeply when presented with a notarized power of attorney. That is the entire purpose of a notarized document. Then I called my own credit union, Oak Valley Credit Union, where I hold my mortgage. I needed to hear from an actual human that my home was secure. The branch manager, Mr. Wayne Miller, a kind man who always keeps a dish of butterscotch candies on his desk, pulled my file and reassured me. Mortgage current, title clean, 0 flags. Then, because local credit unions are conversational, he added one detail. Funny timing, though. We received a formal property verification request on your condo late last month from an outside lending firm. Standard routine, but I didn't recognize the outfit. I kept my voice quiet. What kind of verification, Mr. Miller? Asset and title encumbrance check. The kind that comes through when someone is underwriting a new line. I thanked Mr. Miller, hung up, and sat motionless in my kitchen while the refrigerator hummed its single note. Everything else in my binder was past history, money spent, old cards closed. This was active present tense. Underwriting is an operational word. Somewhere out there, a commercial lender was actively verifying what my condo was worth and how much equity I held in it, which happens for exactly one reason. A brand new financial instrument was being constructed in my name, and it wasn't completed yet. For the first time in 6 weeks, I wasn't reviewing a past crime. I was standing directly in the path of an ongoing one. I want to be transparent about the emotional weight of those days. That Friday afternoon, Toby walked into my bedroom while I was adjusting an index card on the closet door. He asked why I had a paper puzzle taped up where my winter coats belong. I told him it was an organizational game for my hospital job, and he accepted that the way 7-year-olds accept simple explanations, asking if he could have my red marker when I was finished. I handed it to him. He ran off to color, and I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and leaned over the sink for 10 minutes. It wasn't the stolen money breaking my heart. Money can be re-earned. Poverty is survivable. It has clear protocols. It was the cold math of trust. 12 years of Tuesday dinners. Call it 600 home-cooked meals. And through every single one of them, the two people at the head of that table knew what was being leveraged in my name and passed me the rolls anyway. I kept thinking about my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, Dad's mother, who passed away in 2021, a tough, practical woman who drove an old station wagon until she was 82 and kept peppermints in her pockets for Toby. Near the end of her life, while living in my parents' guest room, she had taken my hand in the kitchen one afternoon and said out of nowhere, "This family consumes its quiet ones, Maya." Don't be quiet the wrong way. I had laughed it off back then, kissed her cheek, and poured her more tea. Standing at my bathroom sink, I finally understood the warning she had tried to hand me. The next morning, I washed my face, cooked pancakes for Toby, watched morning cartoons, and bought another pack of index cards on my way to my shift. I allowed myself exactly one breakdown at the sink. That was the budget, and I stuck to it. Hank came to my door before I went to his, which tells you everything about Hank Mercer. Sunday evening, he gave 2 sharp knocks on my door and stood on the mat with Roscoe. He had the professional look I recognize from trauma doctors. Bad news delivered with precision. "Might be nothing," he said smoothly. "There's a dark slate crossover SUV that's come through our lot 3 times this week." Slowly. Tuesday afternoon and again this morning. The driver got out and took photographs of your entrance. Both doors, front and rear slider. I asked how he knew the photos were focused on my specific unit. Hank gave me the look 30 years of law enforcement gives a man. Because I watched him line up the camera lens, kid. He photographed your deadbolt lock. He handed me a piece of paper. He had written down the license plate number on the back of a hardware store receipt. I stood on my doormat holding that slip of paper and the boundary I'd maintained between my private shock and the real world quietly disintegrated. I invited him in, poured fresh coffee, and told him the entire story. The unauthorized accounts, the power of attorney signed while I was in labor, my mother asking about my lockbox. Hank listened without interrupting. When I finished, he delivered the single most practical sentence anyone had offered me in 6 weeks. "You don't need a shoulder to cry on, Maya. You need a formal criminal case number." He pulled out his phone, made a direct call to an old contact in the department, read off the license plate, listened for 20 seconds, and ended the call. "The crossover is registered to a commercial business," Hank said, setting down his mug. "A commercial locksmith operation over in Irondequoit." We stared at each other across my table. I had a binder full of old paper crimes and an active transaction in underwriting. And now I had a commercial locksmith photographing my door locks. Roscoe let out a heavy sigh under the table, like an old patrol dog who had seen this exact script play out 100 times before. The final Tuesday dinner before my 34th birthday was the most affectionate one my family had hosted in years, and that was how I knew the trap was closing. Mom went full hostess mode. The red velvet cake from Bella's Bakery was officially ordered, 3 layers, no debate. Aunt Clara confirmed her travel. The heavy, formal tablecloth was ironed and laid across the sideboard like a flag. Dad had 2 beers instead of his usual 1, though he still left his sentences unfinished. Justin arrived on time for once, his pickup truck spotless in the driveway. He spent 10 minutes bragging about how smoothly it was running. "Best financial decision I ever made. Getting that truck loan cleared off," he said proudly. Mom smiled into her green beans, and the comment passed like background noise. I logged it in my memory anyway. By then, I logged everything. The critical moment came from Toby, who was coloring at the far end of the table. He looked up at my mother with the directness of a second grader and asked, "Grandma, why do you have a key to my house?" The dining room went completely silent for a beat. Mom offered her practiced laugh and patted his head. family doesn't need permission to have keys, sweetheart. It was the second time I had heard her state that doctrine. But driving home that night, it was the physical key itself I kept thinking about. She did have a key. I had given her a spare copy back in 2021 when she helped me paint the kitchen after I moved in. What she didn't realize, because I had never mentioned it, was that I had replaced the original door locks in 2023 following my divorce, when a locksmith rekeyed the entire condo. The brass key sitting in my mother's kitchen drawer belonged to a lock that no longer existed on this earth, which meant if she wanted physical access to my apartment, my records, or my gray document box, polite family status wouldn't turn the cylinder. She would need a professional locksmith, say, one driving a dark slate crossover SUV. I stayed late that night to help clear the dinner table, which surprised no one, because the family fixer always stays to clean up. Mom took a quiet phone call out on the back porch, her voice dropping the moment the glass door slid shut. Dad went into the den to watch the late news. And for 5 minutes, I was entirely alone in the dining room with the mahogany china hutch. The yellowed folder was still tucked under the linen napkins. I am not going to sugarcoat this. I opened my mother's china cabinet and pulled out the folder, because by that point I had earned the right to see what was inside. The folder was soft at the edges, opened hundreds of times over a decade. Inside was page after page of lined notebook paper, and on every single line, written in ink that slowly shifted color as the years progressed, was one signature practiced over and over and over: Maya Vance, Maya Vance, Maya Vance. The earliest sheets from 2014 were shaky, the loops too wide, the slant wrong. By the final pages, the handwriting was flawless, smoother and more consistent than my own signature after a 12-hour night shift. Page after page of my own name. Practiced like piano scales until the forgery was more convincing than the real thing. I stood in my mother's dining room holding physical proof that this was never an emergency measure during a hard month. This was deliberate practice. Someone had sat at this table for years, training their hand to impersonate me. Under the handwriting practice sheets lay another stack of documents, bank statements clipped together, bearing a name that made my chest tighten: Eleanor Vance. My grandmother's bank statements from 2019, 2020, and 2021, her final 3 years of life. I heard the back porch door begin to slide open. I used my smartphone to rapidly photograph every document in the folder. The practice pages, the bank statements, the folder itself. I smoothed the linen napkins back over the shelf, closed the glass door, and was drying a serving platter when my mother walked back inside, glowing from her call. "You didn't need to stay to do those, Maya," she said warmly. I turned and smiled. "It's no trouble, Mom." That's what family does. The morning after finding the folder, I stopped gathering evidence and began taking formal legal action. I took my master binder to the local UPS store and copied every single document twice. One full duplicate set went directly into a safe deposit box at Oak Valley Credit Union, with Mr. Miller witnessing its deposit. The second set returned to my closet command station. Then I logged onto the Federal Trade Commission's official identity theft portal and initiated a formal report. It is a comprehensive digital form constructed for victims of systematic fraud. It prompts you for account details, dates, dollar figures, and addresses. I had every data point mapped, tabbed, and verified. Then I reached the drop-down menu that stops people like me in their tracks. Relationship of the individual who used your personal information without authorization. I stared at the blinking cursor over the options as if the screen were asking, "Are you sure you want to cross this line?" Parent. I stood up, walked to the sink, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, sat back down, and selected it. I filled it out twice, once for my mother, once for my father. Submitted. An official federal confirmation number appeared on the screen. I transcribed the string of digits onto the cover of my master binder. It was the first structural boundary placed between myself and my parents. I scheduled an in-person intake appointment with the Brighton Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit for the following week, the earliest opening they had. My doorbell rang. 2 sharp knocks. Hank stood on the mat, his jaw set hard. The crossover SUV came back, he reported. 20 minutes ago. This time the driver got out with a tape measure. He measured your front door frame and the rear sliding patio door, wrote down the numbers, got back in his vehicle, and drove off. Measuring frame dimensions. You only measure door frames when you are preparing to replace the hardware mounted on them. I spent that Saturday transforming my home into a legal fortress. A heavy-duty, high-security deadbolt was installed on the front door, along with a high-definition video camera mounted directly above the mat. My home, my property, no permission required. The rear patio slider received a solid steel security bar anchored into the track. Then I executed the detail I am proudest of, the move that made Hank let out a rough laugh when I described it to him. I cleared out the gray fireproof lockbox on my closet shelf. Every original legal document, my house deed, Toby's birth certificate and social security card, the certified power of attorney copies, Grandma Eleanor's original savings bond, was moved directly into my credit union vault box alongside the master binder set. The gray fireproof box returned to its exact spot on my closet shelf, fully visible from the bedroom doorway, carrying its exact original weight. Because I filled it with carefully folded photocopies of junk mail expired grocery coupons and a single sheet of printer paper containing one typed sentence. Nothing left here. If someone broke into my home to confiscate my physical records, they would find precisely what they deserved to find. Nothing. I stood in the closet doorway admiring my decoy lockbox, realizing that I had set a quiet trap without yet knowing who would walk into it or when. The answer arrived Sunday evening by phone, wrapped in birthday excitement. Mom called bright and energetic, confirming Wednesday dinner one last time. Then, casual as a casual thought, she moved the future around. Oh, and don't schedule anything for Friday morning, Maya. Your father has a quick bank appointment at 10 o'clock. Just a minor paperwork filing. And after that, we're completely free for the weekend. A minor bank appointment, a paperwork filing. I told her Friday morning sounded fine, wished her a good night, and hung up. I didn't know what was booked for Friday morning. I only knew that my mother had just handed me their hard operational deadline. Between my hospital shifts that week, I finally conducted a detailed audit of the photos I had taken of my grandmother's bank records. Eleanor Vance spent her final 3 years living in my parents' guest room so my mother could care for her. I recalled those years in broken fragments. Grandma shrinking with age. Her car sold, her peppermint supply running out. I remembered her complaining at the dinner table that her monthly pension deposits seemed smaller than they should be. And I remembered, this is the part that sits heavy in my stomach, my family laughing off her concerns. Grandma is getting confused in her old age. Bless her heart. I had chuckled along back then. I was 29, pulling night shifts, overwhelmed with a newborn. It was easier to believe an old woman was losing her memory than to confront what was actually happening to her funds. The bank statements didn't laugh. They showed a rigid monthly pattern. Systematic cash withdrawals from an account carrying a designated caregiver card. Small enough to resemble household expenses, consistent enough to drain the account. I calculated the total twice, a $24,500 extracted over her final 24 months of life. Drained from a retired public school teacher's pension, the final cash withdrawal was executed 4 days before Eleanor Vance passed away. 4 days. I put my phone down and sat in silence. Here is what you need to understand about my grandmother. Eleanor Vance was never confused. The proof was built right into my own life. Years earlier, she had locked away a 45,000 certificate of deposit, a financial instrument that required her personal, physical signature in a bank branch to touch, the one asset nobody could talk her out of. That was the exact money she left to me in her will, the money that became the down payment on my condo. She hadn't lost her mind. She had hidden her last financial shield from her own daughter-in-law and handed it directly to me. I owed Grandma Eleanor an apology I could only deliver one way now with complete accountability. I added her statements to my binder behind a new tab. I made the divider red. The Financial Crimes Unit of the Brighton Police Department operates out of a quiet, low-ceiling office that smells of fresh toner and stale coffee. Detective Sandra Ruiz was a sharp, focused woman in her late 40s with reading glasses resting on a chain and a handshake like a clamped vice. I handed her my black master binder and kept my explanations short and factual. Detective Ruiz read through the contents for 20 straight minutes without uttering a word, turning pages, checking cross-references, flattening sheets with her palm while I sat quietly with my hands folded in my lap. Her first question had nothing to do with my parents. Who else has physical access to these duplicates? A credit union vault, I replied. She nodded once, the exact look I give a junior nurse when a patient handoff report is executed flawlessly. She began asking targeted questions, exact dates, how I discovered each item, whether I had confronted any family members directly. Zero confrontation. I told her. Nothing has changed in my tone or behavior. Tuesday dinners as usual. Detective Ruiz looked over her glasses at me. That shows unusual discipline, she noted. Most victims confront immediately. I manage unstable patients in the ICU for a living, detective. Remaining steady while a situation unfolds is my job. Then she did something that completely shifted the stakes of the investigation. She slid one specific page back across the table, Mr. Miller's written note regarding the property check on my condo, and tapped it twice with her index finger. Everything in this binder, Ruiz said, gesturing to the 12-year timeline, is past history. Serious prosecutable financial crime, but history. This single page is active present tense. I waited. Someone initiated a major property credit line against your condo address last month. That is underwriting activity. Underwriting means money that has not moved yet. She removed her glasses and looked at me directly. Ms. Vance, this isn't just an investigation into what your parents did in the past. This is an active intervention into what they are attempting to execute right now. Detective Ruiz kept my master binder. I drove home with the windows down, feeling the momentum of the situation pivot. Ruiz called my cell phone 3 days later while I was on shift. I stepped into a quiet medical supply closet to take it. We located the active transaction, she said without preamble. There is a 92,000 home equity line of credit currently sitting in final underwriting at a regional mortgage firm. Borrower listed Maya Vance. Collateral property, your Crestview Manor condo. Application executed using the forged 2019 power of attorney. The figure went through me cold as ice. The 92,000 leveraged against the only home that was ever mine. Signed using a document forged while I was lying in a hospital bed holding my newborn baby. There's more, and I need you focused, Detective Ruiz continued. The transaction is cleared for final signature and disbursement this Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Friday morning. Dad has a quick bank appointment at 10 o'clock. Just a minor paperwork filing. My mother had casually handed me their exact deadline 10 days in advance over the phone while describing a red velvet cake. Then Detective Ruiz outlined their tactical plan, and I stood among the IV fluid bags and listened. The mortgage lender's fraud department had already received Ruiz's formal affidavit. The loan was officially blocked, frozen from the inside, but nothing about the system status would reflect that to the applicant. No cancellation notices would be sent. No red flags displayed to anyone logging into the portal. The application would appear completely clear to close right up until someone walked into the branch office Friday morning to execute final signatures and collect certified cashier's checks. Well, let the transaction appear operational, Detective Ruiz instructed. It is frozen solid, but the individuals who built it have no idea they are walking onto thin ice. I signed the formal criminal affidavit that afternoon, the official document that names names. Driving home, I calculated the timeline. The 92,000 loan collapses on Friday morning. My birthday dinner takes place Wednesday evening. Whatever my mother still needed from inside my apartment to finalize Friday's transaction, she now had a strict 48-hour window to retrieve it, and she had already booked the table. Do you know what dramatic irony actually feels like? It feels like overwhelming sweetness delivered through a phone speaker while you stand in your kitchen possessing complete knowledge of a crime. Mom called on Monday, 2 days before the dinner, walking me through the birthday itinerary like an event planner. Dinner is served at 6:30 sharp, Maya, because your father gets irritable if the meat sits too long. The red velvet cake will be picked up at 4. Aunt Clara confirmed. The cousins are arriving at 6. Just close family under one roof, exactly as it should be. Then came the casual sentence she had been setting up the entire phone call to hide. And Friday morning, your father and I will wrap up our little bank errand. And after that, honey, everything is going to feel so much lighter around here. I can just feel it, so much lighter. I stared out my kitchen window at Toby's bicycle lying in the grass, keeping my voice completely neutral, the tone I use when a family asks if their relative is going to recover, and the medical answer is no. That sounds wonderful, Mom. Red velvet sounds perfect. She talked for 3 more minutes while I provided appropriate responses. When she finally ended the call, I stood holding the phone, feeling an impossible mixture of cold anger and profound pity. She was so completely confident. She was coordinating cake icing and felony bank fraud in the exact same breath, so convinced the week would execute according to her plan that she was already celebrating the relief. She had no idea the 92,000 loan beneath her feet was already dead. She had no idea that her minor paperwork errand on Friday morning was a room where law enforcement officers would be waiting for her signature the moment she picked up the pen. There was still one tactical detail I couldn't see clearly what, specifically, was Wednesday night's dinner designed to accomplish. My phone vibrated. It was Toby's elementary school. He had forgotten his lunchbox. Life continuously interrupts a standoff. I drove to the school and dropped off a turkey sandwich. On Tuesday afternoon, the day before my birthday, my father arrived at my condo alone. In 5 years, my father had come to my home by himself maybe 4 times. He was carrying a small box of wood screws for that hall shelf you mentioned fixing, a shelf I had offhandedly mentioned 6 months ago. He stood on my doormat, turning his baseball cap around and around in his hands like a man waiting at a railroad crossing. I did not invite him inside. We stood on the porch talking about trivial things for 2 minutes. The summer heat wave, the local minor league baseball team, Toby's biking. The entire time, his eyes kept sliding away from my face to inspect my front door frame. First the hinges, then the strike plate, and finally the heavy new deadbolt mounted to the wood. Brushed nickel, obviously brand new. I watched him register the new hardware, and I watched him try desperately not to let me see him registering it. Installed new locks, he finally offered, his voice so artificially casual it made my chest ache. Locks wear down over time, I said evenly. He nodded slowly at the nickel deadbolt as if it were a strange animal. Good idea, he muttered softly. You have to be cautious. You always were the careful child. Maya. Then my father looked at me, really looked at my face for the first time in years, and for 2 brief seconds, Something shifted behind his eyes. Something heavy, sad, and desperate. Something that looked almost like a warning searching for a way out of his mouth. It never found one. He handed me the box of screws, mumbled his goodbye, and walked down the steps toward the pickup truck he had driven since I was in high school. I stood on the doormat and accepted the operational reality. He had seen the new deadbolt. That intelligence was heading straight back to my mother, straight into their operational machinery. Whatever was planned for Wednesday night, their team would now adjust for the new lock, that night at 9:41 p.m. My new doorbell camera sent an alert to my phone. The dark slate crossover SUV again, rolling slow and silent through the parking lot, passing my unit without stopping. Its third pass this week. Whatever was coming, the locksmith now knew about the deadbolt too. Good, I thought, surprising myself. Let them bring better tools. Tuesday night, my kitchen hosted the most absurd tactical meeting I will ever experience. An ICU nurse, a retired state trooper, and a financial crimes detective sitting around my kitchen table drinking decaf coffee beside a crayon drawing Toby had made of Roscoe the Hound. Hank provided the critical piece of intelligence that connected the final dots. His contact at the commercial locksmith operation in Irondequoit had verified a specific service call booked for Wednesday evening. A complete emergency residential lock replacement scheduled for a Crestview Manor address, booked by an older woman describing herself as the property representative. The tenant, she had explained to the dispatcher, would be out of town at a family function, and the family managed the unit's physical maintenance. Detective Ruiz set her coffee mug down with a small click. That is the operational window, Ruiz stated. She needs physical access to whatever is in your lockbox before Friday's bank appointment. Original documents, the property deed, original title papers that the mortgage company flagged. Your birthday dinner isn't a celebration. It's an alibi she constructed to guarantee you are far away from this apartment for 3 hours. It is a striking feeling to hear your life spoken about so plainly. My mother had scheduled my birthday party the way a thief plans a distraction. Detective Ruiz outlined the police response. The commercial locksmith service call was flagged the moment an unauthorized entry was attempted on my condo. Plainclothes officers positioned in the lot would move in. An overt property crime caught in progress, Ruiz said. That turns a complex paper trace into immediate physical evidence. Nobody touches your home, Miss Vance. Then both of them looked at me. Because the plan required one essential element, me. I said what needed to be said before anyone had to ask me. The only window of time they are absolute certain I will be away from this condo with witnesses present is Wednesday night at 6:30. So I will attend my birthday dinner. I will smile past the gravy and eat the red velvet cake. I want one detail understood clearly. I manufactured no trap. I invented nothing, suggested nothing, dangled no bait. They built this exact timeline themselves, booked the locksmith themselves, selected my birthday as the window themselves. All I chose to do was refrain from stopping them. Hank walked Detective Ruiz to her car. At the doorway, Ruiz turned back to me. Wednesday night, she said firmly. My team will be established in your parking lot before the cake is sliced. Do not warn them. Do not confront them. Do not alter your routine. You are simply a guest attending a family dinner. I couldn't sleep after they left, so I did what I do when sleep won't come. I reviewed records. The photos of my mother's china cabinet files were all organized in my master binder. But I had been avoiding one final cross reference, matching my grandmother Eleanor's bank statements directly against my family's old calendar events. When laid aside, the dates told a devastating story in 3 distinct acts. Act 1, 2019. Grandma Eleanor moves into my parents' home. Card. Appears on her account for groceries and prescriptions. Small, plausible cash withdrawals begin. Act 2, 2020. the withdrawal amounts increase. And here is the detail that made me pause twice that year. The statements reflect temporary account lockouts due to suspicious activity. Eleanor fought back. 83 years old, no computer, living in their guest room, and my grandmother still managed to call the bank to flag her account. And twice, someone using a caregiver designation and a smooth phone voice got those locks cleared. Act 3, 2021. The cash extractions became weekly, continuing uninterrupted right up until 4 days before her heart failed. And threaded through all of it was the detail that made me set my pen down. She never surrendered the 45,000 CD, untouchable without her physical presence and personal signature at the bank counter. The single financial fortress an old school teacher built that her family couldn't talk her out of. That was the exact money passed to me. The money anchoring the condo I lived in. My mother needed entry into my home before Friday to secure the original property deeds to leverage that equity. And I understood now that in her twisted internal accounting, she didn't even view it as theft. She viewed it as recovering assets she felt were rightfully hers. Eleanor's fortress had new walls around it, and the exact same woman was at the gate with the exact same sweet voice. I closed the binder and turned out the kitchen light. Tomorrow was my 34th birthday. I intended to eat the cake. There was one final photograph from the china cabinet folder I haven't mentioned yet, because I needed time to process what it meant. At the very bottom of the yellowed folder, my mother had preserved a tiny archive from the year 2008. The formal foreclosure notice on Vance Machine and Tool, my father's small, struggling repair shop on Elm Street, and taped behind it, a handwritten draft of a letter written in my father's blocky pencil script addressed to a commercial loan officer. I read it twice. My father, a man I had never heard raise his voice or express deep emotion, was begging, misspelled words, crossed out lines, desperate promises. He offered to work any schedule, accept any interest rate, if they would just refrain from foreclosing on the family home. Because his elderly mother lived with them and his children couldn't switch schools. And in the margin of that desperate draft, written in my mother's neat, sharp handwriting, was a single short sentence: "Stop begging. I will manage the books from now on." I knew what that margin note represented. It was the exact moment the dynamic in that house changed forever. Somewhere in 2008, my father broke under the weight of financial shame, and my mother stepped over him and took control of the family ledger. And he was so completely relieved to be spared the public humiliation of failure that he never asked her how she managed the money ever again. It explained everything about him: the peeling beer labels, the endless talk about the weather, the eyes that constantly searched the floor. For about 60 seconds, sitting at my kitchen table, I felt a profound, genuine sadness for Victor Vance, a man drowning in 2008 grabbing the first thrown rope, even one with a barbed hook attached to it. But here is where I landed, and I want to state this clearly: financial terror explains the first fake's signature in 2008. It does not excuse 12 years of systematic identity theft against your own daughter. A drowning man gets one desperate grab. After that, he is simply actively swimming with the current that is pulling his child underwater. Wednesday arrived hot, clear, and bright. An ordinary July evening with lawn sprinklers ticking in the neighborhood. The strangest element of the entire day was how completely normal the morning felt. I made blueberry pancakes. Toby at 4 and successfully negotiated for a 5th. We took his bicycle out to the parking lot, where Hank was already installed on his porch with Roscoe, pretending he wasn't keeping watch over my unit. Toby rode 3 full laps around the parking island without putting a foot down, and Hank raised his coffee mug like a judge waving a checkered flag. Toby looked back at me, his face glowing. "Mom, did you see that?" "I saw it, baby," I said. I saw every second of it. Packing his overnight bag for Brenda's house felt like the only critical tactical operation of the day. Pajamas, toothbrush, his favorite stuffed raccoon. At Brenda's front door, I hugged him a second longer than usual. He squirmed away the way 7-year-olds do, which was entirely correct. Back at my condo, the rooms were spotless and quiet. Decoy lockbox sitting on the closet shelf, packed with junk mail. High security deadbolt installed. Camera operational over the mat. I laid my navy blue dress across the bed, a simple, professional dress suitable for sitting perfectly still. I conducted a final review. The evidence was secured in a credit union vault. My son was safe across town. The trap was set. All that remained was the role only I could perform: show up, sit at the table, and be lied to beautifully one last time. I had 45 minutes before I needed to leave, and I spent it doing one last review of the binder digital photos. That was when I noticed a record I had glossed over earlier. A credit bureau notice dated 5 weeks prior. And hard inquiry notice from a credit card company. And the name listed on the inquiry was not Maya Vance. It was Toby Vance, my 7-year-old son. A social security number I had personally watched a hospital clerk assign to his birth file in 2019. 5 weeks ago, someone had typed my child's social security number into an online credit application. The strategy wasn't just active, it had a new target. The exact same playbook they had executed on me in 2014. An account opened early, statements routed away, debt built silently over decades. They had waited until I moved out to start on me. They hadn't even waited for Toby to lose his baby teeth. What I did next took exactly 8 minutes, timed by the digital clock on my microwave. Because severe anger and trauma nursing converts instantly into protocol, or somebody gets hurt. I placed a total credit freeze on my 7-year-old son's file across all 3 credit bureaus. Minors can have their credit frozen. Every parent reading this script should know that option exists. I saved the confirmation receipts, called Detective Ruiz immediately, and read her the inquiry dates and creditor details. Ruiz went dead silent for 3 seconds. Add that to the formal criminal affidavit, she said sharply. Targeting a minor changes the severity threshold. A judge reads that page first. I hung up, put on the navy blue dress, and zipped it up myself. They had taught me one final lesson that afternoon. I was no longer doing this just to protect my past. I was doing it to protect my son's future. Detective Ruiz called at 4:15 p.m. for a final operational briefing. Her team would be established in the Crestview Manor parking lot by 6:00 p.m. 2 unmarked tactical vehicles positioned to cover the front entrance and the rear patio slider. Hank had formally received permission to monitor from his front window. My instructions were absolute. Arrive at 6:30. Be entirely ordinary. Keep your cell phone face down on the table. Keep your face completely composed. One rule, Ruiz emphasized, her voice hard as steel. Whatever occurs at that dinner table, whatever statements are made, whoever leaves the room, let it happen naturally. Do not warn them. Do not obstruct them. Do not assist them. You are simply a guest at a dinner. The only mistake you can make tonight is interfering with the operational sequence. I told her I had spent 4 years training for the role of a woman sitting at a dinner table, keeping her mouth shut. Then go execute, Ruiz said, and disconnected. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and conducted a final check, not of the dress, but of my facial expression. In intensive care, we refer to it as your nurse face. The composed, calm exterior that remains level while a trauma room is collapsing around you. Soft eyes, relaxed jaw, a gentle smile that reassures everyone while revealing absolutely nothing. I have maintained that exact face through horrific night shifts. I could maintain it through a family dinner, 15 minutes across town, windows down, warm July air filling the car. I pulled into my parents' driveway behind Aunt Clara's sedan and sat for one deep breath, looking at the 2-story house I had grown up in. porch light glowing, dining room windows lit gold, my mother's silhouette passing by holding a stack of formal plates. Somewhere across town, a commercial locksmith van was checking its clock. So was Detective Ruiz. So was I. My mother opened the front door before I could even reach the porch steps. She has monitored that driveway her entire life, as if she owns the street. There's my birthday girl. She smelled of expensive perfume and sweet lemon soap. She embraced me with both arms, and I hugged her back, feeling through the knit of her sweater how shockingly frail she actually was. This woman who had manipulated 12 years of my financial existence with a kitchen landline and a ballpoint pen. The house was staged to perfection. The formal linen tablecloth ironed flat, the silver dinnerware aligned, decorative candles arranged on the sideboard, and the red velvet cake sitting in a bakery box on the kitchen counter like a centerpiece. Aunt Clara hugged me next, holding me at arm's length, telling me I looked tired in that affectionate way older relatives do. The cousins arrived with wine. Dad was stationed by the patio door, pulling the paper label off his beer bottle. When I said, "Hey, Dad," he replied, "Hey, kiddo, happy birthday," addressing a spot slightly over my left shoulder. Justin arrived last, freshly showered, work boots replaced with clean sneakers. He ruffled my hair the way he did when we were kids. I allowed it. Before we proceed to the climax in that dining room, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to sit in a room full of people acting as if everything were perfect while holding a truth that was about to shatter the entire room? Drop a comment below and share your experience. I read through your stories in the comments. Now, let's step into that dining room. Dinner proceeded like every major production my mother has ever staged. On schedule, perfectly served, conversational cues assigned. Glazed pork loin, roasted potatoes, fresh rolls in a cloth basket. My mother directed the table from the head seat, refilling wine glasses, steering topics away from anything controversial, keeping the surface smooth. I ate, laughed on cue, and monitored the room like a telemetry screen. Dad said very little, slowly building a tiny pile of torn paper beer labels beside his plate. Justin kept checking his phone under the table, then glancing at the grandfather clock in the hallway, then looking at Mom. A subtle triangle of anxiety he repeated 5 times between the main course and the salad. Aunt Clara launched into a long, familiar story about a raccoon getting stuck in her attic, which gets funnier every year it's told. Then my mother stood up, tapped her wine glass with her silver ring, and delivered the birthday toast. She was masterful. I will grant her that. She was genuinely compelling. She spoke eloquently about how family is the ultimate anchor in a chaotic world, about roots and loyalty, about how deeply proud she was of Ormaya, our dedicated nurse. The cousins offered warm hums of agreement. Aunt Clara beamed. Dad stared intently at the tablecloth. And then she delivered the closing line, her arms spread wide to encompass the rooms. Everything you have built in your life, Maya, came directly from this family. The table offered a soft murmur of applause. I raised my wine glass along with the rest of them, looked my mother directly in the eyes and drank. If you had been watching through the dining room window, you would have seen a proud daughter celebrating her life with a loving family. Only 2 people in that room understood what that toast actually meant, and one of us was drinking wine while the other was checking the hallway clock again. 7:40 p.m. The busy, calculating eyes of a woman whose evening had a second act scheduled. Between the main course and the cake, my cell phone vibrated once in my purse. Detective Ruiz, and I had established a strict communication protocol: 0 messages during dinner unless critical intelligence arrived. I excused myself politely to the guest bathroom down the hall, locked the door, pulled out my phone, and opened the encrypted message. 2 image files. The first photograph was a high-resolution scan of the original 2019 power of attorney document retrieved directly from the notary public's physical archives. The bad photocopy smear on the second witness line was entirely resolved on this clean master file. Witness number 2, Justin Victor Vance. The second photograph was an official debt payoff receipt dated March 2019 and an 11,000 auto loan. Justin's pickup truck, settled in full via a single lump sum electronic transfer originating from an account held by Victor and Helen Vance 9 days after the power of attorney was notarized. Detective Ruiz attached a single caption line, verified this afternoon. Thought you should see the signature before you look at him again. I stood in my parents' guest bathroom staring at the screen. The week I was strapped to a hospital bed fighting preeclampsia to safely deliver my son. My brother stood at a notary counter across town and swore under oath that he watched me sign away my financial life. And the spotless pickup truck he washed every weekend, the one he bragged about at every single dinner. Best financial decision I ever made, getting that loan cleared off, had been paid for with my stolen credit identity, 11,000. That was the exact price my brother sold me for. Something deep inside my chest didn't shatter. It simply went quiet, cold, and calculated. I filed Justin Vance into a new legal category in my mind. I flushed the toilet for appearances, washed my hands with soap, composed my face, and returned to the dining room with a polite smile. Mom was leaning toward Dad's ear, and the entire room seemed to slow down because I recognized the sentence before she even opened her mouth. The birthday candles were being placed into the red velvet cake, Aunt Clara counting them out loud. The cousins playfully arguing over whether 4 candles would set off the smoke detector. My mother leaned over to my father, dropped her voice to that quiet register she believes is completely private, and whispered the line, "Since everyone's here, have your son go change the locks at her apartment. 10 seconds, start to finish." Dad's jaw worked once, like a man swallowing pills without water. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He offered the smallest, tightest nod a human being could produce, and tapped Justin on the arm as he reached for the coffee pot. And Justin, my brother, witness number 2, set his cloth napkin beside his plate, stood up, and announced casually that he needed to step outside to take an urgent call regarding a construction job estimate. He was already pulling his key ring from his pocket, the ring carrying his truck key, and one brand new brass key that fit nothing in his world. Aunt Clara called out after him, Justin were about to light the birthday candles. He waved a hand without turning around. 2 minutes, Aunt Clara. Start without me. The front screen door clicked shut behind him. His truck engine roared to life. His headlights swept across the dining room windows. And he pulled out of the driveway, heading toward Fairport, toward my condo, toward a lockbox filled with expired coupons, toward a deadbolt he didn't know existed, and toward 2 unmarked police cruisers waiting in the dark with their engines idling. I pulled the most challenging shift of my entire nursing career at that dining room table, and it lasted exactly 61 minutes. Monitoring a family that had no idea their entire operational scheme had just hit a concrete wall, I ate my slice of red velvet cake. I told Aunt Clara it was the finest cake Bella's bakery had ever baked, and I meant it. My mother gradually relaxed, chatting about how Friday morning's paperwork filing was going to represent a fresh financial start for the family, and I agreed pleasantly that it certainly would. The hallway grandfather clock ticked steadily. When headlights finally swept back up the driveway, the vehicle was moving far too fast. The front screen door slammed open hard enough to rattle the glass frames in the hallway. My brother Justin staggered into the dining room like a trauma victim coming through the emergency department doors, moving too fast, completely disoriented, already beyond help, His face was the exact shade of bleached white linen. His key ring was hanging upside down from his index finger. He stumbled across the room toward my mother's chair without acknowledging anyone else in the room, leaned down to her ear, and attempted to whisper. But the entire room had gone dead silent the moment they saw his face, the kind of absolute silence that turns a whisper into a loudspeaker. Every single person at that table heard my brother say, "Mum, there are police at her apartment. They stopped the locksmith in the parking lot. They had a physical search warrant, Mom. A detective. They knew my name the second I stepped out of the truck." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. They knew about Friday morning. The room did not erupt into dramatic shouting. That is the detail people don't understand about true structural detonations inside a family. The immediate aftermath is absolute, deafening silence. Aunt Clara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. One cousin slowly set her water glass down on the wood with a sharp click. Dad went gray around the lips and placed both palms flat on the formal tablecloth, a man physically bracing himself against a floor that had just dissolved beneath him. And my mother maintained her smile. It remained plastered on her face a full second past its expiration date, a hostess mask frozen in place, while her eyes darted frantically around the room, conducting internal calculations. Who heard? How much was said? How can this still be managed? I watched the exact millisecond her mind realize the equation was completely unresolvable. Then Dad's cell phone vibrated violently against the wood table. Everyone flinched. The screen lit up face, up where all 11 people at the table could read the caller ID: Oak Valley Credit Union, Regional Fraud Branch. On a Wednesday night 36 hours early, Dad didn't make a move to answer it. The phone rang 6 full times, then cut to voicemail in front of 11 completely silent human beings. And into that heavy, suffocating silence, my mother finally turned. Not toward her pale son standing wrecked at her shoulder. Not toward her husband staring at his hands. She turned directly to me. Sitting calmly in my chair, napkin in my lap, birthday cake finished. Because she understood before a single document was produced. My mother looked down the entire length of her formal dining table, looked at the daughter who had stopped being managed, and I watched her realize it was completely over. She stood up so violently her dining chair shrieked against the hardwood floor. "What did you do?" she spat out, low at first, then rising sharply as the polished hostess persona burned away, revealing the raw panic underneath. "Maya! What did you do? You brought the police onto your own family, on your own mother and father!" Aunt Clara gasped. "Helen, what is happening?" My mother cut her off with a vicious slice of her hand through the air. "Everything I have ever done in my life, I have done for this family," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "You ungrateful, selfish girl! Everything you have came from this house." There it was again. The foundational toast, delivered this time at maximum volume with rage behind it. I remained seated. I kept my hands folded neatly on my navy blue dress, and I used my ICU voice, the low, quiet, completely unhurried register I use at 2 a.m. when a frantic family is screaming at a cardiac monitor. The voice that doesn't need to raise its volume, because it carries absolute authority. "You're right, Mom," I said softly. "Even the debt." The sentence landed in that room like a physical blow. I didn't bring the police onto my family. I continued, my voice steady as steel. I filed a formal criminal report regarding 2 individuals who forged my legal signature while I was hooked to an IV line fighting to safely deliver your grandson. My mother's mouth opened, but before she could speak, I pulled a single piece of paper from my purse, laid it face up on the formal tablecloth, and slid it into the center of the table where everyone could read it. Not the entire master binder, just one single page. "That is an official credit inquiry report from 5 weeks ago. I stated, looking around the table. Executed using the social security number of a 7-year-old child. Pass it around. Aunt Clara reached for it first. I watched my aunt read her great-nephew's full legal name, his birth year, and the credit application details. She set the paper down as if it were burning her fingers. Helen, Aunt Clara whispered, in a tone I had never heard her use. He is 7 years old. My mother didn't even look down at the page. That refusal told the entire room more than the document ever could. She scrambled for a new defensive position. Tears first! I sacrificed my entire life! Nobody understands the burdens I've carried! Then shifting blame. Your father managed those accounts. Ask your father! And Dad, pale! Hands still pressed flat against the table. Chose that exact moment to speak the only completely honest sentence I have ever heard him offer in my adult life. She's telling the truth. Dad whispered to the tablecloth. All of it. He didn't look up when he said it. He sat back slowly, as if uttering those 6 words had emptied his body of its entire skeleton. It arrived 12 years too late, but every person in that room heard it. Justin stood wrecked beside the china cabinet. I looked at him last. 11,000 for your signature on a power of attorney, Justin, I said quietly. You want to know what it bought you? Go look your nephew in the eye. My mother attempted one final stand, drawing herself up, chin raised, reaching for the authority that had ruled that house for 40 years. I am your mother! This is my house. We are your family. And family does not need permission. I stood up then, unhurried, completely calm, and collected my purse from the back of my chair. It does now, I said. It's called a criminal warrant. Nobody followed me out to the kitchen except Aunt Clara. I picked up the bakery box containing the remaining red velvet cake. More than half the cake left boxed and neat. My aunt, bless her heart forever, didn't offer a single lecture or platitude. She simply opened the back porch door for me. I bought my own birthday cake once when I was 12. I told her quietly, holding the box, with money I earned babysitting because Mom said the family budget was too tight that year. Tonight, I'm just taking what belongs to me. Aunt Clara placed both of her hands gently on my face. You call me Maya, she said softly. Whenever you need anything. I mean that. Behind us in the dining room, my mother's voice was frantically demanding a phone number, my father's full name, and the word attorney. I drove the 15 minutes back to Fairport with the car windows down, the red velvet cake belted securely into the passenger seat. The Crestview Manor parking lot was quiet again. The commercial locksmith van was gone. A single plainclothes police sedan sat parked under the trees at the far end of the lot. Up at his front window, backlit by a soft lamp, Hank stood holding his mug. As my headlights swept past his porch, he offered a small, formal nod, the 2-inch nod of an old patrol trooper acknowledging a shift successfully completed. Roscoe's tail gave one heavy thump against the glass. My new high security deadbolt turned like silk. The first door that ever been only mine. The next 3 months unfolded at the deliberate speed of the legal system, on paper, through official filings, measured by court dates. Formal criminal charges were filed by the Monroe County District Attorney's Office, systematic identity fraud, forgery, and grand larceny against my mother, forgery and criminal complicity against my father. The execution of the search warrant yielded the yellowed manila folder directly from the mahogany china hutch as primary evidence. Handwriting practice sheets and all. I was told the detectives in the financial crimes unit reviewed those signature practice pages with genuine astonishment. Justin made a formal deal with prosecutors on day 3. Represented by his own counsel, he offered complete testimony regarding the 2019 power of attorney notarization, the auto loan payoff, and the Wednesday night break in attempt. His total cooperation reduced his charge to a misdemeanor with probation, and a permanent fracture in his relationship with me that no court document can repair. The 92,000 equity loan application was formally canceled and dissolved. My condo's title remained entirely clean. The 20,800 in fraudulent debts was systematically removed from my credit record, account by account, as official police deletion notices arrive. Each confirmation letter was placed behind a green tab in my binder. At her formal arraignment, my mother entered a plea of not guilty, claiming to the judge that the entire matter was a minor internal family misunderstanding. The legal system she had successfully manipulated for 12 years simply filed her paperwork and set a trial date. 3 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning in October, my entire world fit comfortably inside a sunlit parking lot, and it was more than enough. Toby was riding his bicycle around the parking islands with complete confidence now, taking the turn sharply. While Hank called out lap times from his porch swing and Roscoe barked encouragement from the grass. Brenda dropped by with hot coffee and sat on my front stoop for an hour. My mail arrives at one single address, now mine. And I open every single envelope the exact day it arrives, which sounds like a minor routine, unless you have lived through this story, in which case you know it represents total freedom. Aunt Clara calls every Sunday after church. Sometimes we discuss the court proceedings. Mostly we talk about local news, baking, and Toby's elementary school spelling tests, which is its own form of healing. I do not take calls from my parents' defense attorneys. And there is a telephone number I never saved that I have allowed to ring out to voicemail twice. Justin sent me a long text message in September. Careful, apologetic, trying to explain his actions. I read the entire message standing at my kitchen counter. Set my phone down and finished preparing dinner. I haven't replied, and I haven't blocked the number. Some doors you don't slam shut with violence. You simply stop oiling the hinges. As for Toby, I explained the situation in a way a 7-year-old could safely carry. Grandma did something dishonest using Mommy's name, and the police are handling it. None of it was your fault. And true family members don't need to manipulate your records to love you. He processed that for a moment, asked if Roscoe could come to his next birthday party, and went back to his coloring, because children have an incredible instinct for what actually matters. His credit file remains completely frozen, and will stay frozen until he turns 18. The old savings bond from Grandma Eleanor hangs framed on the wall above my desk, not for the monetary value, but for the signature. Hers and only hers, written cleanly on her own document. Last week, Toby asked why I framed a piece of paper. I told him a very wise, quiet woman kept one important thing safe her entire life so she could pass it directly to us. He smiled. Like a secret treasure. Exactly like a secret treasure, baby. The red velvet cake, for the record, was entirely finished within 2 days, and I have ordered my own 3-layer red velvet cake from Bella's Bakery every July since. It tastes remarkably better when your name on the receipt is the only place your name is working. I used to believe that love meant handing your family the keys to your life and hoping for the best. Now I know that real love is the one thing in this world that never needs to practice your signature behind closed doors. Thank you for listening to their secret stories. If Maya's story served as a reminder for you to pull your own credit report or protect your children's personal information, take this as your sign to do it today. If someone in your life needs to hear this story, please share it with them. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done if you found that yellowed folder in the china cabinet. I read and respond to your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to their secret stories for more cinematic audio dramas every week. Until next time, guard your peace, protect your boundaries, and stay safe out there.